to be his mouthpiece today. Let us begin with a word of prayer, my dear friends. Our Father in heaven, as we approach the study of your words today, we humble ourselves before you, Lord, knowing that with our own we can never be able to understand any of this. But because of your promise that you will send your Holy Spirit to illumine our minds, we step in confidence, knowing that you are God, that you will help us understand this truth. Thank you so much for being with us and inhabiting our praise and worship today. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen.
A lot of things are going on in my mind when I was listening to that music. Our lesson study this morning talks about worship and the three angels' message. The epicenter of the book of Revelation is about worship. The conflict of heaven by which we view our situation here on earth, the great controversy, is about worship. And the conflict of worship where Satan wanted to be worshipped as well. But he cannot be because he is a created being. And so we are in this great drama of Earth's history because of that conflict that centers and is anchored in the issue of worship. But the song says, let there be praise, let there be joy in our heart, and worship him only. It's such a wonderful, powerful message for us to consider. It's nice to be remembering some of the faces there were my students not many years ago when I was teaching at the Adventist University of the Philippines. Our two brothers here in Zoom are reminding me as well of my home country by way of your background there. The beaches in the Philippines are wonderful. You should go and visit there because we have loads and loads of beaches like that one in our country. I'm sure some of you here are familiar with some beaches as well. The Caribbean, for those of you who are from the Caribbean countries, it is a paradise for those that have these beautiful warm waters to enjoy. I wish that one day we will all be with God in heaven. That is our hope. That is the summary of all our joys. That when Jesus will come, we will be with him. I'm sure there will be beaches there, Elder Alter. Although John is saying that there will be no more sea, it is a symbolic of his loneliness because he is separated from the people that he loves, the church that he ministers to. Because remember that he was exiled in the island of Patmos, and it was the sea that separated him and the sea that exiled him. And that is in that context that he said that there will be no more sea in heaven, meaning there will be no more separation and loneliness. But I do believe that we will be having beaches in heaven for us who loves beaches. We will spend countless hours there. And that makes us very excited of heaven. And our worship, our praise is always centered in Jesus Christ because he will be with us and he will be our constant companion for eternity. We'll be talking about something very important, and I'm inspired to share this with our brethren in Southampton. I have not been to Southampton, but maybe in the future I will get to visit that place. If I'm not mistaken, Southampton is, I'm familiar with that name because, the Titanic is made in Southampton and it started its life there and its voyage in Southampton. It is a historic place as far as that is concerned. But other than that, I am not familiar with the place. But now I'm starting to be familiar with our brethren there. And it's such a joy to be studying the words of God and his truth this morning with you. We will be moving into a very important subject matter in the book of Isaiah. I would like to title my message, A Vision of God. I think that for some of you who have read the book of Isaiah, you might have come in contact or you might have heard this story already or this sermon. But for the sake of emphasis, let's revisit it this morning because I believe that this message in the book of Isaiah is very relevant in the time that we live today. Of course, I'm sure that many a times we have touched the topic of the coronavirus and the pandemic and the change that it gave to the world. It is something that we consider to be beyond our expectation, something that is what many say unprecedented times, historical times. It's nice also to know that we're living through a historic moment where people in the next 20, 50 years on will study and try to evaluate what had happened, and we are living through it. But don't we realize that we are really living into a momentous time in the world's history? And this pandemic is just one of the many headlines by which we know that the coming of the Son of Man, okay, the God that we worship, is on its way to come and take us home. And so in the book of Isaiah, the vision of God happens in the 6th chapter, and we will study together prayerfully, asking the Lord to help us understand this from verse 1 all the way to verse 10. And I propose 4 important lessons for us to consider and to remember as we continue to wait and minister before Jesus will come. I will start reading, and if you have your Bibles with you, I would like to invite you to open them with me in the book of Isaiah chapter 6, verse 1. Chapter 6, verse 1 opens with this line: in the year that King Uzziah died. Now, King Uzziah is a strong king of Judah. He is one of the very few in the lines of the king that we see to have followed the Lord and has lived his life in accordance to his will. The Israelites has a very different way of reckoning time. We would see that in the many writings of the Bible. In Nehemiah, for example, or in Daniel, they begin with these lines, like in the year of Josiah, or in the 6th reign of Jehoiakim, or in the year, for example, in the year that Uzziah died. They don't specify the date. So that a lot of our biblical scholars had a hard time putting dates to the reigns of the king. And in fact, it was only after the discovery of the Assyrian tablet that they were able to make some triangulation, because there in the Assyrian tablet, they found that in the year of their king, in that particular year, the king of Israel was also mentioned. And so by that reference, the biblical writers, or the biblical scholars rather, were able to pinpoint the reign and the corresponding dates of the years of the kings of Israel. Other than that, when we refer to the Bible, they would always refer to their dates as on the 3rd year of King Jehoiakim, or in the 6th year of the king of Ahab, things like that. And one thing that gets me into thinking is that the Bible writers has a lesson about what kind of king that was. They would refer to their time as to the manner or to the kind of king that lived according to the time period. It is very common in the biblical narrative. And so we understand here that in the year that King Uzziah died, something very significant is being introduced by Isaiah. And this is something that we need to discover. First, going back on the background of who Uzziah is. Uzziah is a good king. Very rare in the long line of wicked kings, he was good. We can find the record in the book of Chronicles, chapter 26, verse 4 and onwards, that he was good and he was strong because, according to the scriptures, he did what was right in the eyes of the Lord. And because of this, of his obedience and doing what is right in the Lord blessed him. And he was able to build towers. He was able to build gates and fences and walls around the city. He built strong men. He was able to command more than 500,000. Reference to this is that during the reign of Tiglath-Pileser III, the monster of a king, an Assyrian king, Israel was the only country that stood against the onslaught of Tiglath-Pileser. Everything else fell into the marauding army. And so it's such a terrible time when this strong Israelite king died. And so by this we understand now, studying from the background of the story, that when this experience of Isaiah happened, it is a political crisis for the Israelites. It is easy to understand why it is a political crisis, because now you can see from the horizon the pillaging, marauding, vandalizing army of the Assyrians. And now the king that had stood the onslaught for many years has died. And so this is a picture of a political crisis. And that is the reason why I bring this to you, my dear friends, because the world is trembling. The world is in a political crisis. The world is also in an economic crisis, much the same as that happened in the time of Isaiah. But this is not just the crisis that the people of the Lord, Israelites, are facing during this time. They are also experiencing a spiritual crisis. And to my understanding, this is a more difficult crisis compared to the political crisis that they are facing. In Isaiah chapter 1, verse 2 and 3, the scripture tells us through Isaiah that the people of Israel are having spiritual problems. They are a rebellious people. In chapter 1, verse 4, if we follow, Isaiah mentioned that Israel is a sinful nation, evildoers. You can see that? Isaiah, verse 1, chapter 1, verse 2 and 3 and 4, Isaiah is painting a picture of the spiritual condition of Israel during this time. So they are not facing only a political crisis. More importantly, they are facing a spiritual crisis as well. Chapter 1, verse 21, they experience spiritual harlotry. They are worshiping other gods and idolaters. Chapter 1, verse 22, they are murderers. Verse 23, there's corruption, injustices, they are thieves, and they succumb to bribery. In chapter 2, verse 8, they are idol worshippers. Chapter 2, verse 11, they are full of pride. This is, sometimes we think of Israel as the people of God, and yet here in vivid description, Isaiah is telling us that they are facing a spiritual disaster, a spiritual crisis. But let us look at the situation of the world today as we make a paradigm shift of the condition of Israel in Isaiah's writing and to the condition of the world right at this moment as we speak. I have here an excerpt from a writer to the New York Times about the condition of America at this moment. And I'd like you to take note of this one. He said, "What in the world has happened to us? What a dysfunctional mess we are in. Where several factors that contributed to our country's chaotic state, one that stands out above the rest is our culture of losing its moral and ethical roots." These are sobering words. These are sobering words. According to the poll conducted in May 2018, not very recently, 49% of Americans say that the state of moral values in the US is poor and deplorable. More than half of the United States citizens are saying that the moral compass of its people are poor and deplorable. Much of the moral decay can be directly attributed to our country's increasingly opposing God over the years in favor of secular humanism. See, this writer is not a Christian, but this is his observation that the decline of the moral compass or the moral decay attributed to the United States is because of their opposition to God in favor of humanistic secularism. Secular humanism says that I am the center of my world. I take control of everything. I have to make decisions for myself. I am the most important creature in the universe, putting away God and his power. He continues with his selection, with his article. As we continue to reject God and punish him and push him out of our country, we are swinging out doors wide open and welcoming corruption, hatred, and violence in our country with open arms. He quotes Edward Gibbon's final volume of The History of the Decline and the Fall of the Roman Empire, and he makes a little bit of a similarity of what happens to the corruption of the old Roman Empire to the corruption of the modern America today. He says, 3 of the 5 major causes he identifies behind the fall of one of history's greatest empires that today's America currently identifies with. These are the 3 things that he said are common in then the Roman Empire, in today's situation of the US, One, the breakdown of the family. Two, an insatiable craving for pleasure. And three, the decay of religion. This is the moral crisis that the United States are facing today. The breakdown of the family, the insatiable desire for pleasure, and the decay of religion. But before we go and focus on the United States moral decay, let us look at what's happening in the United Kingdom. If you do a little bit of research about the social and the moral condition of the UK, you'll find one of the findings being run by King's College in London, in collaboration with some of the social scientists at Oxford University. And let me just share with you the summary. In 30 years' time, they made a survey of what are the social thoughts of a local residents here in the UK, and this is what they found. In 30 years' time, when people in 1989 believe that drugs like marijuana and cannabis are not supposed to be taken, 60% in 1989, only 29% today say that it is immoral. From 69% to 29% drop in 30 years here in this country. People think that drug use and the use of marijuana is okay. What about homosexual relationships between consenting adults? This is a rather sensitive topic, but we are just stating this for the sake of the scientific evidence. In 1989, 40% believed that it is immoral. 40%, still a low number, but look at the statistics now. Only 13% in today's adults think that it is immoral. There is a drop of the belief that it is immoral from 40 to 13%. The use of hard drugs from 89% to 67%, almost 20% of people has started to believe that it is okay to use LSD and hard drugs. What about violence and television? 53% 30 years ago to 32%. We're talking about a 20% drop of people tolerating violence and sex and immorality in television in 30 years' time. Abortion, from 35% then believe that they are not supposed to be done, to only 18% today. All of this, I cannot spend all our time in looking at the statistics, but we are looking at a decline of a moral compass of people today. My dear friends, the world is experiencing what the Bible has already prophesied, that in the last days, men will be lovers of pleasure. Well, we believe it with all our heart. It is nice also to be looking at solid evidence from science itself that this is indeed happening in our time. We are facing a political and an economic meltdown. The Philippines has tripled its borrowing in just over a year. And I think this country also is having a hard time in debt because of this coronavirus pandemic. A political, an economic, and more importantly, a spiritual crisis is upon us. The same is the story of Isaiah, and that's why I bring your thoughts to you. That in the days of this crisis, we go back to what you're reading. Isaiah went to the temple. And this is the challenge for each of us. When we are befallen with crisis and we are facing uncertainties, where do we go? We don't go to our political leaders. Isaiah gave us the example. He went to the temple, my dear friends. And what did he see there? He saw a vision of God. God allows us to see a vision of Him when we are looking for Him in times of uncertainties and crisis. The record says here in Isaiah chapter 6, and I saw also the Lord. How did Isaiah find the Lord in his vision? I saw Him sitting upon His throne, high and lifted up, and His train filled the temple. This is what God allows Isaiah to see when he sought the Lord in this time of uncertainty, of unprecedented crisis. God is giving a message that we are not supposed to focus ourselves to the crisis, but instead focus ourselves on Christ. What is the picture of God there? Why did God allow Isaiah to have a glimpse of where he is at that very moment? God wants Isaiah to have a glimpse of where he is, to give him an assurance that no matter how terrible things has become, no matter how troubled we are, no matter what kind of crisis we are facing at the moment, God is still seated in his throne, high and lifted up, the record tells, the scripture is telling us. It is a picture of God in control, my dear friends. We can personalize this in our lives. We might be having some personal problems, relational problems, spiritual conflicts, health problems. Some of us might be battling cancer, losing our job. It is an economic and spiritual problem. But remember that above all this, God is still in control. He's giving Isaiah and you and me a message this morning that he is seated in his throne and he is over all God of everything. God is showing us his transcendence and his eminence of all these things. And yet he is so concerned with the affairs of men that he gave this message to Isaiah, telling Isaiah, in other words, don't you worry. I got this. I am on top of this all. I am still in control of everything. I am still presiding over the affairs of man. I am still the Lord of all. In the Bible commentary, some of the Adventist Bible commentary, volume 4, verse 1, pages 127 to 128, we can read, God designed that Isaiah should catch a wider vision than merely what he saw happening around him. I like this one. We know we're human beings and our vision is myopic. We cannot be able to see what is beyond now. We can't even see the reason beyond what has happened immediately in our past. It is only God that knows the end from the beginning. And here, the commentary is telling us that God allowed Isaiah to catch a wider vision than merely what is happening around him. God would have him know that despite the might of the Assyrian army, he still reigns supreme above the throne and in control of the affairs of the earth. So when perils encompass God's people and the powers of darkness seems about to prevail, God calls them to look up to him, seated upon his throne, so that they might have hope. A beautiful, beautiful line from the commentary on this vision of God. Sometimes we lose sight of the vision of God. We're overwhelmed with the Assyrian armies of our life. We're overwhelmed with the pandemic, with the loss of lives, with the loss of jobs, with the uncertain future. That somehow we need to be reminded that God is in control, providing us hope, knowing that he is still presiding over the affairs of the earth. That is the first lesson that we can learn from this vision. Whatever befalls you, my dear friend, whatever bothers you right now, I want you to go back to this vision of God in Isaiah. He saw God seated on his throne. God was not pacing back and forth being anxious. You see? God was not wringing his hands. He was just seated there relaxed, high and mighty, his train filling out the temple. On top of everything, still the Lord of the earth and the God of everything. The vision of God will give us hope, giving us courage, giving us certainty that he is God above all. The second thing that we can learn from this reading is from Isaiah chapter 6, verse 3. And one cried unto another, and he said, Holy, holy is the Lord of hosts. The whole earth is full of his glory. And the post of the door moved at the voice of him that cried, and the house was filled with smoke. It becomes apparent, my dear friends, that when we see a vision of God, we are also reminded of how holy he is. Because around him are creatures of celestial beauty, whose job is to worship him and utter the words day and night, holy, holy, holy is the Lord Almighty. What does it say to us? That when we see God in his throne, we are to remind ourselves that we are worshiping a transcendent and holy God. God calls for his people to live a holy life. In the Hebrew grammar, the word that is being repeated is to be emphasized. And here the word holy is being emphasized 3 times because God wants us to know that he is holy. And he calls for us to be holy as well. We read in Leviticus chapter 11, verses 44 to 46, God's prescription and God's call for his people, for you and me, to live holy lives. The same is being repeated in the New Testament. 1 Peter chapter 1, verse 16 calls for us to be holy as our God is holy. In 1 Peter chapter 2, verse 9 is again repeated. Holiness to God. Hebrews 12:14 repeated the refrain, even said that without holiness, Paul is saying, there is no one that can see God. 2 Peter chapter 3, verses 11 to 12, he reminds us that when the earth will be burned in fire and everything else will melt in fervent heat, Peter asked the question, what kind of people ought you to be? You should be people of holiness, a people that was called out from darkness to his marvelous light. Now we understand holiness in the context of not as sinless perfection. Okay? I don't want you to misunderstand that holiness is for us not to commit a mistake, because otherwise it would be frustrating. Because we commit mistake every day. We're humans. So what does it mean when God calls us for holiness? We study in the scripture that David was said he was righteous. God mentioned Job to be holy and righteous. He even mentioned of Abraham to be righteous before God. They're holy men. But we cannot say for certain that they are sinless. Abraham was a doubter. He is a liar. He lied about Sarah. Okay? David, David, he was an adulterer. He was a murderer. He was a manipulator. And yet God calls him holy and righteous. So with Job. So what does it mean to be living a holy life then? Holiness is Christian maturity. Mrs. White is very clear in this saying that a relationship with God, to be connected to the branch, to be covered with his robe of righteousness means holiness. The righteousness of Jesus Christ is the one that makes us holy. So it means for us only to have a relationship with him, claiming his death and his life over our own, that makes us holy. This is what is meant when God says that you have to be a holy nation. You have to be called out to be holy. Without holiness, you cannot see God. Paul is exhorting us to have a relationship with God, and that would call us for holiness. His righteousness to mine, his life for mine, his life and his death is mine. And that is the second lesson in the book of Isaiah. When God revealed himself in Isaiah, he also revealed his holiness to him. Let's move further to the third lesson that we can get from the reading of this vision of God. Lesson 3 that we can find is that all of these things made Isaiah worship God. Again, we go back to what we have learned this morning in our lesson study. It's the idea of worship. Worship is central to our relationship with God, putting God where he is and putting us where we are. This is something that Satan is not really very comfortable and happy about. He is scheming and planning to take our focus away from worshiping God. And sometimes he would get into the way of our relationship with God by giving us difficulty and crisis. This is Satan's strategy to take our eyes from worshiping God. A quick look at the story of Job. We can see the great accuser of mankind, Satan, saying, would Job worship you for naught? He is maliciously insinuating that without blessing, Job will not worship God anymore. That during the time of crisis, we will not be able to worship God as we should. I would like to share with you a little bit of a quote that I have collected in the light of the worship of Job. Thomas Merton quoted, if we love God for something less than himself, if we love God only, not in the presence of crisis, but in the presence of abundance, if we love God for something less than himself, we cherish a desire that can fail us. We run the risk of hating him if we do not get what we hope for from the relationship. Further on, Eric Ortland, another author, said this, in particular to the story of Job. Part of the prologue of Job teaches that God sometimes temporarily interrupts his normal policy of giving earthly blessings to his saints. Now, my dear friends, let us erase from our mind that God is the author of crisis. It was never in God's plan, and it's never in the personality and character of God to hurt his people. What God does is that sometimes he withdraws his hand in his normal policy of giving earthly blessing. God is always in the business of blessing us. God is always in the business of protecting us. But sometimes he withdraws his hand and allows the devil to touch us and put us in a crisis. And puts us in a position. Sometimes God would withdraw his hand in giving earthly blessings to his saints and put us in a position where we have every earthly reason to give up on God. Sometimes God allows crisis to come. He allows the coronavirus to come. He allows a loved one to pass away. He allows us to lose our job or to have some broken relationships or whatever problems that we have today. Because this is the reason. This is the case because a genuine relationship with God, not predicated on blessing, not predicated on any earthly and material gain, it is a saving relationship with God that can save us. God wants us to prove to ourselves that our worship is not because of material things that we can get from him. We're not preaching a gospel of prosperity. That if we worship God, everything will be nice, everything will be good, that we become rich and desirable. That is not what we preach. All we are preaching is that when we are with God, even if we are in the face of crisis, we can still focus on Christ and his blessings, other than the pain and suffering that is surrounding us. You know, the story of Job is that when he heard the news about his lost family, his lost economics, his lost camels and all of that, he rent his clothes, right? He put ashes on his head, fell to the ground, and did not curse God. He worshipped the Lord. This is the kind of relationship that God wants us to have. The same is being exhibited in the story that we are telling this morning about Isaiah. When he saw God, he remembered God's holiness, and it makes him worship God in that holiness. The fourth lesson that we can find is that when Isaiah saw God, and I hope this is going to be our experience this morning as well, we will be able to find and reflect our spiritual condition. In this Isaiah chapter 6, verse 5, then woe unto me, Isaiah said, for I am undone, because I am a man of unclean lips, and I dwell in the midst of a people of unclean lips. For mine eyes have seen the glory of the Lord. When we see God in his throne, we can be able to see our spiritual condition. We started to understand that after all, we are part of the problem. The same is true with the story of Isaiah, because before this, he was trying to express other people to have been worshippers of the idols. They are people that are murderers, that are idolaters. In chapter 5, verse 8, he tries to accuse other people of being bad. Woe to the wise, woe to the drunkards, woe to the evildoers, woe to those that commit themselves to evil good, to evil deeds, woe to them that calls evil good and calls good evil. For the first time when Isaiah saw God, he saw who he is. Woe unto me, for I am unclean. Humility is the result of our encounter with God. We will come to know for the first time that we are supposed to be part of the solution when right now we are part of the problem. And this would also result to our cleansing. When we are humble enough, the Lord said that when we are humbling ourselves and pray and ask for forgiveness of our sins and consider our spiritual condition, God is righteous and just to forgive us and heal our land. The third in the movement that we experience, the fourth in the experience is that when we see God, we see who we are, and we would ask for God's cleansing. And that is what happens in Isaiah. He asked for cleansing, and further on we read that God has given him spiritual cleansing. An angel came to him with a fiery coal, a live coal, and touched his lips and cleansed him. Lesson number 4. After spiritual cleansing, there is that openness to God's bidding and obedience to God's will. This is a beautiful expression that when we saw God, we become confident and we are ready to go wherever He leads. In our lesson for September of 2008, it says there that Isaiah, you remember what Isaiah said? Here am I, Lord, send me. Listen very carefully to what the Bible is saying. And also I heard the voice of the Lord saying, whom shall I send? And who will I send for us? God didn't say or specify where, what, when, or what kind of mission is there. It's very important for us to notice that one. God didn't specify anything. He just said, I want to send someone. God didn't say where, when, and what are the conditions. But you know, the courage of Isaiah, having been cleansed after he saw God in his vision and have seen the glory of the Lord and his holiness, he just simply replied, here am I, Lord, send me. As I was quoting the September 2008 quarterly lesson, Isaiah accepted the message and responded because he can. He responded because he believed that God can. He responded not because he has the gift. He responded because God will give him the gift. He responded not because the task is appealing to him. He responded because God would appeal to his heart. He does not know the task. He feels that he is not worthy, but God is. He feels that he is not powerful, but God is. He feels that the task is not fit for his qualifications. Still, he responded because God has chosen him. My dear friends, in this time of crisis, this is a good opportunity for us. We are not again saying that we have to go to the outside of our territory to be missionaries for God. But we have to be ready for this because again, we are to remind ourselves that our church was organized not for the social club. The church is not organized for salvation purposes. The reason for why the church was organized is not salvific in nature. It is always mission. And so this reading of Isaiah from verse 1 to verse 8, we can confidently say that we can now make sense of what's happening around us. We can step in confidence knowing that God is in control. Let me just go and have a brief summary of what we have learned in the experience of Isaiah. That in times of crisis, remember that God is in control. That's the first lesson. That in this time of crisis, let us remember that our God is holy and we need to be holy. Not because we can have sinless life on our own. No, God is always our righteousness. And the relationship with Him would cover us of our sins. The third is that we have to worship God. Despite the crisis, despite our limitations, we can worship God even in the face of crisis. The third, whenever we are in the presence of God, let us remember who we are and where we are. We are sinful and needs God's cleansing. And now that after we have been cleansed and being made aright with God, what do? We come to open ourselves and our skills to the mission of God, to be sent wherever God calls us. Maybe in our homes, maybe in our church, maybe in a different place. But wherever God leads and wherever God guides, He always provides. May the reading of the story of Isaiah gives us confidence that we have to focus on God and His mighty acts, not on ourselves, but in His holiness. Let us remember that He is the God over all, transcendent and immanent, and He is still in control of everything. My prayer is that this church, our church in Southampton, will be encouraged, will be motivated, and may the name of the Lord be glorified and honored from now on until He comes. May the Lord bless us.